For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNewsGlobal. I'm Amitabh Revi on our weekly flagship show, The Talking Point. Today we're looking at the Prime Minister's visits to Germany, France and Denmark with Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri and Professor Ummu Bava. Ambassador Manjeev Singh Puri, India's former envoy to the European Union, and he's also ambassador and deputy permanent representative of the UN, joins us. Evening, Ambassador. I know you just coming out of meetings and giving us time. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And also from New Delhi, Professor Ummu Salma Bava. She's at the Center for European Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. She's a Jean Monnet Chair in EU Security, Peace and Conflict Resolution, and is also the co-author of the book EU-India Relations, the Strategic Partnership in the Light of the European Union's Global Strategy. Professor Bava, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Amitabh.
Ambassador, just quickly coming to you, I mean, India has been consistently in various fora making its position clear on Russia's war on Ukraine. Does Europe understand, Ambassador?
Amitabh, thank you. I mean, this is obviously the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let me say it. They understand. They know. Do they accept? Are they not willing to make their own persuasions? I'm afraid these are two different things altogether. You know, they are a continent and countries which have been there. They know what life is about. They are well aware of geopolitics. They are also particularly, I'm sure, aware of why India has taken certain positions. Having said this, I think we need to simply understand that, they'll continue to make their push because, that's in their interest. And we have to continue to do what is in our interest. But what I liked in this particular visit was, yes, there are divergences. These are known. These are well articulated. But let's focus on convergences.
True. Just talk about the outcomes and the momentum that has been gained. But Professor Bava, on the same subject, white man's wars are treated so differently in this rules-based order that we talk about, whether we're talking about aggressors or defenders or victims. Nobody talks about Afghanistan or does anything about Yemen, or even for that matter, when China attacked India along the land border. That's the point that India is making. About Ukraine, Ambassador, your thoughts how Europe and India are dealing with their separate positions?
So, Amitabh, if you're asking
just this one to the professor.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Amitabh. I think there are wars and wars. I think that's very clear. Who stands with whom and how the fault lines are drawn have become extremely evident over here. We've also seen at the global level the shift from what was seen immediately after the end of Cold War, from the idea of humanitarian intervention to the 2000, after the millennium, to what is called as a responsibility to protect. But when you look at why are these, some wars more important than the other, you see the selectivity, you see the politics, and obviously more importantly, what you see at play is how interests, converge to create certain kind of momentum and a political leverage for certain countries to engage or to even bring up certain wars and put it on even the UN agenda. So I think the current war in Europe has done three important things. One, it's brought war squarely back to the continent. After having got used to living in relative peace, war is back, and with it comes a second point is all your preparations are basically thrown out of the window. Whatever war plans you have, when it hits the reality, you can just kind of see how unprepared Europe is. And point number three is it has created new fault lines. So it is in this context that I think where India stands with respect to its foreign policy position, in terms of stating what its own national interests and priorities are, we've seen the hectic parlays for the last 3 months, and that just clearly shows that the Europeans will always, take more of an affirmative action when it comes to wars in their neighborhood, in the European continent, and anything further away, depends on how it will strategically impact them. for it to even make it onto their foreign policy radar.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing these pictures from Red Square of nighttime rehearsals for the May 9th victory parade, where there was speculation that there could be some kind of announcement. But that apart, Ambassador, in your opening answer, you talked about whether Europe accepts India's position or not. I mean, even today, what we saw happening on social media was that Ambassador Tirumurti, ambassador in the United Nations Security Council, had to tick off the Dutch ambassador to the UK for questioning India's stand. Subsequently, those tweets were deleted, but we do have them. There is some kind of tension, but is it affecting ties between Europe and India, Ambassador?
So, Amitabh, let me put it like this. The Dutch ambassador to the United Kingdom is a fairly serious player. And, this is par for the course for the Europeans to play several games at the same time. So they had the Indian Prime Minister, he spoke to the German Chancellor, the French President was at the Nordic Summit. It's not that the Dutch are not interacting with India on a regular basis. They have huge economic interest in India. But, they are a continent and countries which have been there. They know what to do, and they'll continue to play their game. Naturally, they have to do what is in their interest. They can very simply ask the questions. You're either with us or you're not with us. Their populations also have a right to ask the questions. But I do believe at the end of the day, European leaders, European politicians, European decision makers have sagacity and maturity. And while they play the entire game, which is important domestically, politically for them, they also know where their country's interests lie. And so a relationship with India is a relationship where they see a great deal of merit. And so therefore pushing that relationship would also be important from their perspective, quite apart from the fact that, well, on issues where they have a slightly different perspective, where their domestic politics demands that they take certain positions in public, they will continue to do so.
Right. I mean, one of our viewers is asking exactly the question you just answered, Shreyansh Sharma. Today, the Dutch envoy commented on India's UN envoy, permanent envoy. How do you see this? The ambassador just answered that, Shreyansh. But I'll get Professor Bava to give her thoughts. Professor Bava?
So I think what you see is, as Ambassador Puri also correctly said, you will see different theaters, offer an opportunity to countries to present arguments in diverse fashions, both within the UN and outside the UN. I think if you look at the last 3 months and the very hectic, diplomatic engagement of New Delhi, clearly there was, the idea that India should join what I would call this binary focus of looking at the war in Ukraine as democracies on one side and non-democracies on the other. And India has resisted that kind of, labeling that you just simply join one kind of a league against the other. I think for the Raisina dialogue, the Dutch deputy prime minister was also here in New Delhi. So the position of New Delhi was very clearly conveyed. Why would one of the ambassadors at this point raise it? I think that's best left to themselves. But to say that, to remind another UN member that they should respect and recognize the UN Charter, I think applies to all countries, right? And if you look at the kind of transaction which is going on between the European states and Russia at this point in the backdrop of the war, it's been oft stated. I think the kind of business that India has, it will pale in shadow and significance when we look at what the European countries are doing. So I think it's best not to get into what I would call as these minor distractions and to focus on the larger picture that we've had a very successful visit of the Prime Minister to three very important countries over here. Two countries where we are having important, they are anchors of the European Union, Germany and France. Again, a strategic partnership with Denmark, where it's now a green strategic partnership, and the second Nordic summit. It all means, I think if you look at the statements and the outputs which have come, it clearly shows that everybody has taken on board India's position with respect to the war in Ukraine.
Sure. Let's talk about, as the Puri said, convergences instead of differences, and take them one by one. Master Puri, France. A special relationship, considering how Paris has had our back for decades in various dimensions, right?
You're absolutely right. Look, India and France have a relationship which, in a sense, helps both countries because France, within the Western construct, would like to show a degree of autonomy for its own place. India, also in the world, is a country which strives for a strategic autonomy, a place of itself in this. Now, France and India have been strong cooperation partners in the area of defense, particularly aviation sector. France is also greatly interested in what India is doing in the area of nuclear energy, and these are major areas as far as the French economy is concerned. Secondly, let's also understand France is one of those European countries which has Asian dependencies. There's Reunion Islands to our west, and there are the islands in the Pacific. So they have a good right to claim themselves to be an Indo-Pacific country, and so therefore they have a right and in that sense of feeling that they need to participate in what is happening in this region, a matter of considerable interest as far as India is concerned. So therefore there are strategic national interests on both sides which bring us together. On the other hand, let's also look at something else. President Macron was elected several years back and this time was re-elected. Chemistry between leaders is another important element of international relations, no matter the fact that, of course, national interests in the end trump everything. But chemistry matters. It helps smoothen things. And so the Prime Minister dropping in Paris, even for a few hours, meeting the French President after his successful election victory, important. It helps keep the chemistry alive and it allows leadership to interact on several subjects. The subjects are India, France, India, EU, and of course the EU in the Indo-Pacific.
Professor Bava, I mean, when it comes to France, some experts suggest that France is already and can and should start replacing Russia in the strategic partnership in terms of especially high-tech in defense deals. Your thoughts on that, Professor?
So I think, already India has diversified its defense acquisition. I think that's point number one since the end of Cold War. It's also important to keep in mind, those who are not familiar, that defense platforms offer a tactical and strategic advantage. The kind of weapons you induct and the kind of platforms you operate. You have to also keep in mind the kind of technological shift which is happening. In fact, what we're witnessing today in Ukraine is a hybrid warfare. So as the war action and theater moves, obviously the impact on your platforms are going to be felt. And as India diversifies, it can't just immediately do a 180 or a 360 turn. It means you lose all kind of tactical advantage. So as you diversify, it cannot be that you make it so thin, your strategic leverage that you have in terms of weapon system, that you expose yourself. And our neighborhood, we are in a neighborhood which, where the threats have enhanced. So I think there is definitely in New Delhi, within the government, recognition there is a need to diversify. But this diversification has to be done as you wean away from the other, but without losing the kind of relative advantage. So you can't just shift from one and make it lock, stock, and barrel, just France itself. But I think this has to be slow, and I think it should be seen in tandem with the big push which has been given by the government to also have self-sufficiency in the defense sector by Make in India. So I think that's where the role of France will also become important in terms of the transfer of technology and looking at how India can then develop such platforms in the country itself. It's long drawn out, but I think we do see the beginnings of it.
Sure. Ambassador Puri, just the last point that Professor Bava was making, but not very good news for Atmanirbhar Bharat or Make in India on the eve of the Macron meet, when the French naval group pulled out, if I can use that word, of the P-75I Make in India submarines. They're the latest. The Germans, I think, have gone. The Russians have gone. I don't know who's left. That wasn't a good sign. But overall, the defense platforms with France, Ambassador, you want to talk about that? Because some even say, post-AUKUS and the friction within the Western alliance thereafter could contribute to, say, even Barracuda or nuclear-powered submarines and that weaning away from Russia. And in relation to that, I just want to take a question before you answer from Inder Methil. With respect to France, any hope for nuclear-powered subs developed in partnership with India? Similar to what I'm asking, Ambassador.
So, Amitabh, the French would be very interested. So when AUKUS was formed and the Australians cancelled the diesel submarines contract, Many people said, oh, wow, opportunity for India. Look, I want to make a simple point. The French do have certain capabilities in military hardware, but they are no Russia. Let's be very crystal clear about that. And their abilities are limited. So they would be very interested in developing submarines. In the first instance, we would buy the submarines that Australia has not taken. Secondly, in developing a nuclear-powered submarine, they are much more open in terms of nuclear cooperation than other countries are, and so on and so forth. They would be interested. After all, it's good economics also as far as they are concerned. But I think we need to understand. I don't see anything of this kind at all happening. The French are limited in their abilities and so on. Russia is at the moment not just a huge, massive supplier, it is a huge, massive armament supplier of all kinds. Don't forget, we are talking in terms of even handheld rifles, bazookas, we are looking at missiles and so on. These are not so easy and binary things. The French have their role, they've played a good role, the role will continue, and I think we will continue to ensure that we have a balance in terms of what we do for our armed forces, trying to stress what we can do domestically. I'm afraid all these years we really haven't had any great sterling successes, but we are pushing on, and I'm sure as we domesticize or indigenize the manufacture, technology transfer takes place in the next generation, we may be able to produce much more at home.
Professor Bava, as the master was pointing out about France having a special place and territories in the Indian Ocean region, how do you see India and France in the Indo-Pacific when it comes to, say, confronting or containing China?
So I think in terms of the Indo-Pacific, France, among the Europeans is an Indian Ocean power. So it is a resident power, and that means it has assets. But this goes back to the point which Ambassador Puri was just pointing out. How much of that assets can be actually deployed long-term, sustainable, and not just in terms of coming for one-hour exercise or, as they say, a flag display. So permanent presence means building up a capacity augmentation at the level of France itself. Having said that, I think France, among the European countries, has also put forward its Indo-Pacific strategy, clearly indicating that it wants to be part of the geopolitical action over here. But it is at this point not in part of any of the existing groupings. That is very important to keep in mind, either in terms of the Quad or the AUKUS. So it also shows that it opens up opportunities for India to look at if other groupings can be constructed. In terms of the larger context of France as building up that partnership to counter the threat of China, I think this is an issue which also is about how much capacity France can bring into play over here. And I think here we would have to expand the circle in terms of which are the actors India would look, and which is why then I think the United States and Russia both become very important in terms of squaring the circle in terms of holding off China, which is why New Delhi would want to keep both these engagements parallelly alive. France can offer in tandem, but I think it is also to look at developing other kinds of, within the framework of the European Union, what it can do and bring to bear in the Indo-Pacific.
Ambassador, I mean, the European Union itself, each of the major European powers, Germany, France, Netherlands, out of Europe now, UK, have Indo-Pacific strategies. I mean, with Ukraine happening, and even before that, how interested and how capable are they really as partners for India, especially when it comes to China?
Look, I think we should be quite clear. Players in the Indo-Pacific are, of course, the United States of America, China, of course, India, and possibly Australia, Japan. They are the big players there. Now, the European countries have some presence. The British, on and off, have some flag-showing exercises. They have a relationship with Australia, another with New Zealand, very close relationship. You have the French often doing things. They are add-ons, but basically speaking, that's the nature of it. And that's something that we should understand. What does it mean to have them included? Of course, because it helps. And why not add on those who are like-minded, who can provide, even if it is only incremental leverage? Because all kinds of leverage is important to the kind of challenge that we are likely to face in the Indo-Pacific, not just we in India, but we particularly because of our geography. And geography certainly matters. We are located here. To us, it is of critical importance. For the others, they're a little far away. They can perhaps take that view that, well, it's not us. Therefore, adding everyone is important, no matter that you recognize and know that their real abilities may be somewhat limited, but they are countries with enormous capacities and capabilities per se. And so, therefore, having them on board is a good idea.
Professor Bava, a question if you'd like to take from Tara, is there any chance of a European country sending its troops to sort out any geopolitical war in the Indian Ocean region? And let me expand that to even include, the South China Sea and Taiwan.
I'm very skeptical at this point that any of the Europeans. I think the preoccupation is so much with Europe, with looking at what they can hold off. Any idea of even sending troops overseas, I think remotely doesn't even figure. In fact, the war in Ukraine has clearly brought home the unpreparedness, of the European countries themselves. Let's not forget there's been, over a period of time, reduction in defense expenditures, and we saw a dramatic shift, at least as far as Germany was concerned, when what's been called as a Zeitenwende, a big shift in terms of increasing the defense expenditure. So I think at this point there's very little appetite in Europe of engaging in anything outside of the European periphery.
Amitabh, may I say something?
Please go ahead, sir.
Let me say something just to add a little flavor to your program. Professor Bava is right in terms of the reality of things. But let me make a point to you. So you ask about something happening in the Indo-Pacific. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about some internal strife? Then let me tell you, when the last time there was some kind of internal strife in Timor-Leste, what is it, some 15, 20 years back, many Europeans sent police forces and others out there. And they will happily do that even now, despite their preoccupations as well. Are you talking about some kind of confrontation with China? Well, if the United States gets into the act, I won't be surprised if the Brits would send forces, if even the Germans would send forces and a few others would. Because that's the nature of the compact there. Look what has happened in the case of Ukraine. While the Europeans, the Germans in particular, including the French, the Italians and others, were reluctant, whether they were coerced, whether they were pushed, whether in any way they agreed on their own, the fact is now it's one voice, and I'm afraid we must recognize that the fulcrum of that voice sits, or the main vocal cord sits across the Atlantic in Washington. And so, therefore, just let me make this a little more colorful. Yes, they would intervene if it was that the big player was itself involved there.
Interesting point you're making there. And the Americans, I think Jake Sullivan has made a trip to Solomon Islands. Is something happening in Papua New Guinea as well. I wonder where that goes. But let me move to another big country that Prime Minister Modi went to, and I think Professor Bava is an expert on that and has got one of the highest merits, if I'm not wrong, from that country, Germany. In terms of Germany, Professor, I mean, how do you look at the German position, which has changed again because of Ukraine? Some say it's changing monumentally. And what does India and Germany have? What do India and Germany have to gain from each other?
So, in the context of the war, of course, in Ukraine, I remember geography puts Germany much closer to the fault lines of the war. It's among the frontline states which would also, along with Poland and Hungary, be receiving the number of refugees coming in. So, these things become more evident and clear on the German streets much faster than, say, if you're further away and closer to the western side of the continent. Germany, in particular, has had a policy of active engagement of Moscow for a long time, from the 70s, when there was a rapprochement in the late 60s and early 70s, and it was especially the Social Democrats who adopted the slogan of change through trade, which meant that the more you trade, the more it will build rapprochement, and it will create a new kind of a partnership and an understanding. That today has really come under the microscope, with the Social Democrats also being asked what has been done. Because one should keep in mind, in 2005, the exiting Chancellor Gerhard Schröder actually went in for the pipeline deal with Russia, Nord Stream 2, which would enhance, German capabilities and strengthen the direct infusion of, gas into Germany without bypassing Ukraine in the process, which also means Ukraine's rights to earning revenue for the pipelines going through were also going to be going down. And despite all the opposition over it, this went through, and it's very interesting that just the last certification was left as the war started on 24th of February, and basically Germany then has stopped the certification, and this has come. So there have been major shifts, a big criticism of the Social Democrats, and a moment of taking stock and asking where is German foreign policy headed. And it was within this that they made a push to increase dramatically 100 billion the expenditure on defense. But again, very slow in response between the official statements and saying that we will not send out specific kind of weapons before it was all done. So where does India and Germany sit together in the larger context? I think Prime Minister's visit came in what was the biennial, the intergovernmental consultations which took place. And in that context, it is important because right on the heels of this, there was an extension of invitation for the G7 summit, which takes place about in a month's time. And I think it's also important that Prime Minister has shared a very good rapport with Chancellor Merkel, and all the earlier IGCs were held with Chancellor Merkel. So, it's not that he doesn't know Olaf Scholz, he's been the Vice Chancellor. But now with the new cabinet, a new grouping, it also means about re-establishing. And I think more importantly, in terms of foreign policy priorities, I think it's also about how Germany and India take forward. So big push here for technology, climate is there, of course, but also about how skill building, economy, all of those things have been brought up. And I think it's also about renewing and saying that I would see it as the Western capitals accepting India's foreign policy position. So it's also about re-envisioning the strategic partnership, because it really is about understanding that India cannot be pushed around, and you have to negotiate with an India which wants and puts out its priorities on the table. So it's important that the IGC takes place in these two contexts: A, the war at the backdrop, and second, that we had President van der Leyen here in New Delhi as the chief guest for the keynote in Rising Nada.
Mr. Puri, Germany says that it's going to wean itself off, if not cut off all Russian and gas and oil supplies by the end of the year. But overall, in the current geopolitical situation, India and Germany, where do you see us standing?
Amitabh, Germany is India's largest partner in the European Union. Let's understand that quite clearly, despite what we said about France. Britain, on the other hand, in terms of composite Europe, is the country where the heart beats for India and our heart beats for them. That's the nature of the civilizational connect, and various other factors, the fact that you and I are talking in the English language. Now, Germany is the heavyweight country in Europe, but it's taking a tremendous hit as a result of the Ukraine war. It is the country which is going to take a hit on the energy side. It's going to take a hit in terms of what the EU is going to have to bear in terms of Ukrainian reconstruction, as and when it happens, Ukrainian refugees, and every single aspect of all of it. The Germans would have been very happy continuing with previous policies, a good situation with Russia, even with China. With China, I think COVID brought about a realization that it couldn't be business as usual, although the size of the business is such that there's no question of cutting back on that in large measures, slowly, quickly, etc., etc. But the fact that populations in a country like Germany, France, elsewhere, now started getting to know that China was not just good, great money and wonderful, but you could ask a question. It wasn't bad, but there was a question, and that is something which the politicians now internalize. Now, in the context that currently stands, India is a big market. It's a good market. It's one that the Europeans know, the Germans know in particularly well. After all, look at the cars here, look at all our standards and so on and so forth. So they would be quite happy to go along. Yes, there would continue to be issues of divergence. But let me point out to you one convergence between India and Germany on the global political scene. No matter the fact that all of this is perhaps lowering the ranking of Europe in the multipolarity stake in the world. Both Germany and India wish to strive for multipolarity, and I don't think our G4 coming together for UN Security Council reform, no matter how it takes, would be weakened by this. There are therefore several stronger impetus that pushes us together. Economy certainly by far the most important, but there are also global imperatives which bring us together. On Russia, Ukraine, I'm afraid, let's be very clear, their geography is entirely different, and as a population, they must have different worldviews on that particular subject.
Professor Bava, since Ambassador is talking about how important the economy is, Piyush Goyal today at a business meeting has said that the FTA with the EU could be done by next year. We've seen what happened with Australia, with the UAE, their talks with the UK. I don't know what's happening with the US, but Israel and other countries. How realistic is that, and how important is it, Professor Bava?
So, in the larger scheme of things, I think New Delhi has made it extremely clear that we are now open to the idea of the FTA. I think that's the first point, and you could see already two in place with UAE and Australia. The British are also in town, and they're already pushing the agenda. They have concluded, I think, 4 chapters have already been discussed. So in that larger context, I think there is a predisposition now in Delhi, at least, to get an FTA done. Why is it also important? You've got to see the kind of trade blocks and groupings which are getting created, and so there's a window of opportunity where we have to ask: do we sit out everything, or do we, also start creating our own groupings so as to not miss the boat on some of the important things there, but you're left totally out of these trade groupings. So there is a new optimism, definitely. I think there's a reassessment. Ambassador Puri will be able to say that more clearly. He had a ringside view of discussions in Brussels, during his tenure. But I think the scaling up has already happened in the last 3 years, and it is also there's a diversification and not putting everything into one basket. I think that's extremely important. So there's a separation of the trade, there's a separation of the investment, and on the geographical indicators, which also clearly shows that there's a recognition that if you pack up everything into one kind of an agreement, you could end up with a no-show. And it may be better to, keep things separate and then see how you can get traction and get all of them to move. So there is a lot of optimism, but conditions have also changed. Remember, we went through for 12 years of negotiation to only stall and even not have summit level talks take place, which is really not heard of when you think of strategic partnership. So with this new pragmatism, we'll have to see is what kind of political will is there to actually get the negotiation done. I think that's extremely important. It should not be a second down start and then running multiple course. So there's an indicator. Is 1 year, is it too much optimism? Is it really an out of sync with the ground reality? It would really require a lot of hard work, because remember that we've also lost out everybody, that's Europe and India and globally, in terms of what the pandemic has done in terms of both the economy and how there will be a tendency to go towards protectionism. I think it's but natural and but automatic. And those kind of things can mean that they should not create new barriers for negotiating the free trade agreement.
Ambassador Puri, what can you share of your ringside negotiations? And in light of RCEP and the slew of FTAs or CEPAs or CICAs, ECTAs that we have been doing, why is there a sudden shift in the Methilas in our position with regard to FTAs? What has changed?
Amitabh, I have to thank Professor Bava. She's used those right words: protectionism, losing out. Look, as far as I'm concerned, an FTA with the UK is a no-brainer. It should be done. All kinds of little things will get worked out. But frankly, we have to make the push. Look, let's look at the European Union. It's an $18 trillion economy. We're a $2 trillion economy. They've been there. They've gone through world wars. They know everything. They'll go through this Russian crisis. We need them. They are the ones which determine almost all the standards that you and I operate on. They have technological capabilities, money and everything. That they're on the way down is an opportunity for us. They also need something other than only China and the West and the Americas. This is an opportunity for us. Look, the opportunity has to come at a cost. The Europeans know what the world situation is. They also have other options, not just India. And so they will play hardball. But in your own interest, you need to push this matter. So when I heard that it's likely to get done by sometime next week, I said, fine, good. It's better than no. We are still negotiating, but we really must give this thing a push. The European Union is by far the largest and best of these deals. Britain is a $2.5 trillion economy. Our total trade with them is a fraction of what we trade with the European Union. Britain wasn't even our largest trading partner with the European Union. In fact, during my time, when diamond trade was its highest, Belgium outranked Britain. I mean, that's the true reality of what Britain is about. But the European Union together is a huge powerhouse in terms of money, in terms of global trade, in terms of ideas, in terms of standards, in terms of technology, and finally, I must say, in terms of money. And it would be in our interest that we provide the necessary push. They are a big bureaucracy. Don't forget, in 27 countries coming together, while without the big two or the big three, you can't get anything done. The big two or big three coming together is no guarantee that things will get taken together. That's the nature of the bureaucracy that they built together after World War II to provide cushion for the shrinking of Europe that happened. And therefore, taken together, they continue to remain a particularly heavyweight voice, especially in terms of money and finance and the economy. And also the green economy, the entire business of climate change, sustainable development. They are the large player and something of abiding interest to us in India.
Green economy, climate change, technology, the Nordic countries, that's a push that hasn't happened in terms of an area in Europe that India wasn't paying too much attention to, Professor Bava. This momentum, where can it take us?
So, if you look at the Nordic countries as a group, they are among the richest. Low numbers of population, high welfare levels. Finland tops the happiness index and really top of the league when it comes to technology. This kind of the Indo-India Nordic format, was very slow to start off, and you can see that we just had the second India Nordic summit, which is also delayed because of the pandemic. And if one looks at the key takeaways, in the document, what has been agreed, then there's a lot of push towards, again, technology, climate change, sustainable development, and, making it happen. And also recognizing that here is a regional grouping, smaller in size within the larger framework of the European Union, with which, India should also look at engaging at a very different level. I think the war in Ukraine has also changed in some ways this geopolitical construct over here, because you've got Finland and Sweden, who are also members of the European Union, but not members of NATO, now actively considering, and I think over the summer, joining NATO. So I think there's also a shift in terms of the kind of strategic value that they bring to play. But more importantly, from India's point of view, I think it's also important to recognize that in our push towards sustainable development, circular economy, achieving the targets of the Paris Agreement and the biodiversity framework, this is where the Nordics can really help in terms of taking the agenda forward.
Ambassador, if you want to have last thoughts on that, I mean, of course, you are a climate negotiator and closely associated with climate change and all things related to that now, even now with Terry.
Amitabh, look, Europe itself is a major source of innovation, a source of technology and source of finance, and we need it for the greening and cleaning of our economy. The Nordics, as Professor Bava very rightly pointed out, are a high-value group within this, even though Norway is technically not a member of the European Union. And therefore, this summit was not just an opportunity of meeting leaders, i.e. building chemistry, but also a place for substantive take forward and the entire business of renewable energy, the entire business of taking things forward in terms of a lower carbon trajectory of your economy. Each of these things gets a push from the technological and financial capacities which the Nordic countries provide, and indeed Europe as a whole. I think substance and chemistry both were well pushed in the course of this summit, of this entire visit.
Ambassador Puri, well put there, sir. And Ambassador Puri and Professor Bava, I thank you both for your experience and your expertise, sharing it with us on Strat News Global, and of course to all our viewers. Thank you both, Professor Bava
Thank you.
and Ambassador Puri.
Thank you very much.
And just a reminder to all our viewers, I did take a few more questions than I got some complaints last time that I wasn't taking questions or even hard questions, apparently. But thanks for all those comments and engagements that you have been continuously pouring into the YouTube chat there. If you'd like to support us, there is, of course, something that we're just going to put up after I take this off, which is a UPI ID where you can help us, support us financially, and we get 100% of whatever you choose. I'll just get Tanmay, my producer, to put it up there. It's there in the YouTube descriptor as well if you want the link. And also, as soon as this stream is done, YouTube will put up a heart-shaped icon right next to the thumbs up, which you have, I'm presuming, have already pressed to like. You can click that as well and give us a YouTube super thanks, and we get 70% of that amount that you choose. So thank you for your continued support, and thank our guests again. This is the Talking Point on Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh.